Hey guys, Evil here. Today I'm going to be talking about something I haven't really mentioned before in any of my videos, and that's comp crawling. Simply because, well, I've been doing RC most of my life. I've only been into comp crawlers for about a year. Crawlers for about 2 years. I've only been crawling for about a year. One season under my belt. But when I was just kind of lurking on the sidelines in crawlers, I made some bad decisions in purchases and things like that, and I kind of wanted to just highlight those for other people who might be kind of on the outskirts of comp crawling like I was, and then might be thinking about doing it a little bit later. So I just wanted to point out some mistakes I made, some things to look for if maybe you're shopping for one used, or maybe even buying your first rig to comp crawl with. Let me show you a little bit what I'm talking about. Okay, for illustration purposes here, I've got 3 rigs. These all happen to be Axial just because that's the brand I prefer for simplicity of getting into it. There are lots of other directions you can go, and I'm not saying they aren't, great rigs or whatever, but Axial tends to be the kind of industry leader, as well as the major jumping off point for people who are getting into this. So I'm going to be using these as my baseline here and kind of show you what to look for, things like that. So what we got here is the first crawler I purchased. It is a Axial AX10. It was the original kit version. Had some downfalls that a lot of the newer rigs do not have, but when I bought it and I started building it up, I thought, well, I'm going to comp with this thing. It's going to be very capable, blah blah blah. So I'm going to show you like everything I've done to it, as well as kind of contrast it with this mostly stock AX10. This is actually a ready to run version that kind of has the basic upgrades that a lot of people do when they're starting out. They just pick up some parts off of eBay because they seem to be obvious choices or whatnot. And then this is my competition XR10. That is my rig of choice today as far as being more capable and a better first comp crawler. And then I've got some motors laid out here to kind of show you some of the different ways you can go and whatnot. So let's get started. So this is pretty much a stock AX10 out of the box. It has a few changes that can be made. This is pretty much like picking up one of these used is about the cheapest way you can get into a comp rig. The AX10, as most everyone knows, is a shaft-driven vehicle. Durable, cheap, because you only need one power plant. As well as popular because it can be used for other things like a decent platform to build a scaler out of, certain things like that. But just want to point out some of the things on this. This started out, I believe, as the ARC, the almost ready to crawl version, I'm sorry, because it did come with a motor, and it's a cool platform to start with, but if you decide to go compete with this, there's going to be changes you're going to want to make right away. Another change that was done on this vehicle was to move the ESC down onto the upper links. Normally they're on the bottom of this battery tray, kind of like this receiver is. That gets your weight up high. It also creates sprung weight. The whole idea is to get as much unsprung weight. You want to get everything down the axles as much as possible. Keeps your center of gravity low. Makes it a lot harder to tip over if your weight's down low on the axle and not up here high where it's going to cause the thing to tip. I mean, you may look at it and go, holy crap, this thing's totally stable, but if you're on a serious incline, that little bit of weight can make a huge difference. Another thing that made it, or that this one has, is it has aluminum links, and this has actually rear high clearance links. And what those do is they're supposed to give you just a little bit more clearance, so that when the crawler is basically belly up to a rock, that's supposed to give you a little bit more clearance for those wheels to bite, so you're not bottoming the chassis out. This one's set up a little bit wrong because the pinion angle actually kind of juts lower than those links, and that can hang up and cause other issues. But the aluminum links, it's for better handling, better durability if you have to jump off of some things. The other links tend to bend, or they could even break in extreme cases. Another thing that's done on this is this front battery tray. Stock on the Axial, you guys have probably seen the Servo sits in the middle. There's nowhere to put any weight or anything on the front of it. This tray is an aftermarket, not aftermarket, but it's a modification kit that Axial puts out, so you can actually scoot your Servo over, and then you can move your battery. Most people will run like a 6-cell, but you can go to like this is just kind of a budget build, so it's actually just using a 5-cell 6-volt nickel metal, and it just gets that weight down there on the axle, as opposed to up on this tray where you it's all about center gravity, getting that center gravity as low as possible. Moving on. If you've seen any of my videos, you've seen me talk on the AX10s about 3-link and 4-link setups. Stock, these come with a 3-link setup. This one has a TCS boomerang installed on the rear, 4-link. That 4-link helps with torque twist, because as you're crawling, the axles are gonna torque, and if you're in a high traction area or you're climbing something really steep, torque twist becomes really noticeable. So just simply switching to a 4-link like this will drastically improve how the rig handles. That can be bought pretty cheap, and it's a great first mod. The other thing I'm going to point out is these tires. In the early days of crawlers, this was a pretty common crawler tire size, so much so that I believe even Axial's latest AX10s are coming with this size of tire. Most comp tires have gone to a much higher, I believe it's 5.5 inch, just to get more belly clearance. If you look at this, there's just not very much belly clearance. You want as much of that as possible to keep from hanging up and helping with vertical climbs and things like that. So a real common first mod is to switch to a more modern set of comp tires, and you can just see the size difference there between the old style and what the newer stuff is. On this rig, which this happens to be my AX10, it has a lot of those same mods. It's got the battery tray. I have the ESC sitting on the upper links. On this one, though, I've gone over to an aftermarket chassis. This is just the Axial SWX, which was pretty popular back in the day. It's a little bit dated now, but still a pretty decent setup if you're going to run bodied. I just bought it because I was like, oh, Axial, you know, I buy everything that they had to put out. So I was planning on comping 2.2 with this, so I went and I put a dig on it, which locks the rear axle, makes the rear axle become a pivot point so you can turn sharper. Also improves, you know, handling characteristics if you're on some difficult climbs. And you can see that the SWX setup does not use a high clearance rear link. It doesn't really need it. Just the way the chassis is longer, it's almost like that chassis becomes part of that bend on that rear link. But I haven't had any real clearance issues. You can look at this and see it has much better clearance than compared to the more stockish AX10. This one has roughly about the same clearance as my XR, so it's not bad at all. This crawler is also set up with brushless. When I got into crawling, I was like, you know, brushed is old, brushless is the newer thing, less maintenance, all that good stuff. For crawling, I could take it or leave it. It's definitely less maintenance. And another thing here is there's a servo on top, excuse me, to actuate that dig. That actually manipulates a little arm that will lock that rear transmission and cause that rear axle to lock. Another mod that's done on this that the other ones didn't have are the Mip Drive Shafts. These are a definite must if you're going to compete with a shafty. because the stalkers just, if you put any kind of power in there, you're going to twist them off. The MIPs seem to hold up really well. This also has a rear forelink. Of course, axial, because I bought everything axial. And pretty much the last thing that's a common mod are aluminum knuckles. We don't have very much light. Aluminum knuckles and C-hubs. And that's more of a durability thing. If you're jumping off of big rocks or whatever, you don't want to be snapping those. You want to at least get the knuckles. There's a lot of torque that gets put on those steering arms, and those will crack on you pretty easily. So going aluminum there is a plus. My crawler also has it, but you'll notice looking at the two, you compare, you're going to see a pretty major difference in the way it looks on the front. That's because this crawler actually has a behind the axle steering setup. You'll see that the steering linkage actually sits behind the axle, and that is just so it doesn't catch on things. If you're crawling in some nasty hairy rocks, that keeps that steering linkage tucked up out of the way and allows you to get into a little tighter situations with it and not hang up a bunch of stuff. The servo actually mounts on there backwards. That's a pretty common setup. This one happens to be axials, but that's a pretty common setup on comp crawlers. Most of the time people will have a behind the axle steering linkage. So anyway, that's about all I can think of right now on shafty comp crawlers. We'll move on to MOA type crawler, or motor on axle, and then I'll talk a little bit about motors. So here what we have is my XR10 with no body. I'll bring it up here so I can show you a little closer. This is what they call a MOA crawler, or MOA, motor on axle, meaning it has a motor on each axle. There's one for the front axle, one for the rear axle. What that does is gets the weight of that motor and all that stuff out of the chassis. We were talking about unsprung weight. Gets all that weight down on the axle. The result of that is a MOA is a way more capable crawler. They will do some pretty amazing things that don't look possible. I'm still shocked all the time when I go to a competition. I see some of the things that a MOA crawler can do. Like I say, this one happens to be an axial. You can buy buy Berg axles or Bully or whatever to get a MOA, even HR, to get a MOA setup. But like I say, I went with axial because they've done their homework. They've figured out the suspension geometry, weight distribution, all that good stuff, and that's all your stuff you have to figure out on your own if you're going to scratch build your own crawler. So we'll go over a little bit of the features of this actual crawler and point out some of the differences. So with MOA, you have two motors on the same rig, and the pretty obvious question is, when you have done that, how do you drive both motors? Well, you could wire them in a certain way to where they'd both drive 50-50 torque split. Although people would complain about clod stall, I won't even get into all that stuff. But anyway, the way you can do it, you can either install two ESCs. This one happens to be a Tekin FXR. This is a popular setup to run two of these to drive each motor. I didn't have the budget for that while I was building, so I'm actually using what's called a pump dig setup. What this does is it allows you to only run one ESC but drive both axles, but this will give you the ability to front or rear dig, or i.e. you can lock the front or rear axle to pivot or affect any stance or weight distribution when you're in some difficult spots. So this setup's not as good because you can't really do variable crawling. If you have 90% torque to the front, 10% rear, that's going to be a lot better in a vertical climbing situation because there's less chance, of a wheelie, things like that. But like I say, there's a cost trade-off there, and if you're on a budget, this is a good way to get into it and still have front and rear dig, which are probably the more important features to have. Another thing I'm going to point out on this rig is the BEC, or battery eliminator circuit. It's pretty much a standard feature in any electronic speed control nowadays, but with the beastly servos that we run on these comp crawlers, it's almost a must to have an external BEC. This allows you to dump more voltage to the servo if you want, like higher voltage than what the stock BEC and the speed control can put out. Allows you to change that. It also allows you to draw more current, which is the most important thing, because some of these high torque servos can actually cause your electronics to brown out. Like, it'll pull too much and cause things to go into shutdown mode. And that's probably as far as upgrades to a crawler, and I'll point this out on any type of crawler, is servo. When you get this thing in a bind somewhere and you need to jiggle the rig around, or even just get it to turn in a tight situation, if you're using, the stock axial servo, which this one is, it's, I think, rated around 90 ounces, 100 ounces, somewhere around in there, at 6 volts, it just does not have the gumption to turn those wheels when they're in tight spots. So comp crawling, you're going to want to upgrade servos. This is a JR8711, which is about a 400 ounce servo, so around 4 times as powerful as a stock servo. These are pricey, but well worth the investment, and pretty much a must for competition crawling. So that and a BEC, those two going hand in hand. When you do the upgrade, you don't want to just get one without the other. And what we have here are some pretty common crawling motors. This is an Energy lathe motor. These are cheaper than like a tune motor you'd buy from somebody like Holmes or even Tekin. This is a 55 turn, so like I say, super high torque, but not great for giving you a lot of wheel speed. But for the budget oriented, these are great. I think this motor is only like 20 bucks. They're just a little bit cheaper because they don't have capacitors built in, things like that. But super reliable motor, rebuildable, has ball bearings, should be great for just starting out. If you're on a budget, that's a great option, around $20. More common comp motor is a 35 turn. Some guys run 45, which is a little bit in between. Still not enough wheel speed in my opinion. The 35 turn is by far the most common brushed motor I've seen. The motors I'm running in my truck are Holmes Hobbies 35 turn. I bought a pair of these Tekin so I can swap out when I do a rebuild without having to have the rig down. And then here we have a Tekin brushless motor. This is 17.5, which is around stock motor speed, or 27 turn. Pretty common crawling motor. The Losi guys like these quite a bit. And like I say, it's just a little bit faster than the 18.5 I have in that, which is a Novak. Those are your more common motors, but the difference is this motor is probably going to cost you, 85, 90 bucks. These I think are around maybe 35 a piece, 40, I can't remember. I bought these used, so I've never bought those. I bought the 35 wines from Holmes for like 27 bucks, 30 bucks each, something like that. And then, like I say, the machine wound energies are like 20 bucks, which is a great motor to start out with if you're getting your first crawler, you're building your first crawler. Another common first mod that's generally cheap to do is adding weight to your wheels, and this seems pretty obvious if you've done any reading on crawlers at all. People will run more weight in the front of the crawler than in the rear. And there are different wheel weight setups and things like that depending on what model of wheel you're running. But if you're running just the stock axial stuff, they don't have any system in place to do that. So what I did was just went to the auto parts store and bought a box of these lead weights. These are for balancing, full-size car wheels, but they have adhesive on them, and they're perfect to add weight to your crawler. They're in 1/4 ounce increments, so you can precisely measure how much you're putting in, as well as divide them up around the wheel to kind of keep things in balance. So This is a huge box I bought. It was like 30 bucks, but I built a lot of crawlers, so I thought it was worth it to invest. But you can buy just little boxes of it from like O'Reilly or wherever for $5 or $6 and enough weight to get your crawler set up. One last note I want to cover are foams. And this is a pretty huge deal when it comes to competition crawlers. And I wish I had something to illustrate better, but I don't. What we have here is a regular single stage foam. These actually came out of a crawler tire, I don't remember which. But you can see it's one density of foam. It compresses the same. The stock axial foams are single stage foams, and you can see, if the light is right, you can see that tire will essentially go flat. So if you're going to set up a competition crawler, you're going to want to pick up a set of two-stage foams. And what that does is, usually the outside, there'll be two rings of foam. There'll be a bigger ring and then a smaller ring on the outside. The outside ring will often be really soft, like memory foam, or just a really soft foam. And then the inner ring will be like a closed cell, much stiffer foam. And what that does is it keeps that tire from rolling. When you put a lot of side load on these, the tire will roll under, and that just kills everything. It kills the handling of your rig. It'll take away steering performance, things like that. So if you get a two-stage foam, like this rig actually has the ProLine two-stage, which I'm actually pretty happy with. It works really well. When you put side load on that tire, it rolls, but only the first stage. The second stage kind of stops it. It also will keep that tire from compressing all the way. Usually it will only compress on the outside stage, so you get a nice contact patch, but you don't have the rig flexing all over the place. Last season this summer I decided I wanted to get into Sportsman Crawling, which Sportsman is shaft driven, no dig. Otherwise I think it's pretty well open. You can do whatever you want, but this crawler isn't legal for that because it has a dig, and it's also at a disadvantage with other Sportsman crawlers because it has all this weight up top. It has extra weight in the chassis with the dig. It has extra weight of the servo on top, things like that. So my video series here is going to be on converting this 2.2 class crawler over to a Sportsman legal crawler setup. And to do that, I bought a few things. The first thing I bought was an Overdrive underdrive setup. In Sportsman Crawling, you can't have a dig, which gives you really tight turning angle. That's gone forever. So, because you can't dig, one of the more common things to do is put an underdrive overdrive setup. That makes one axle spin faster than the other. So this will actually bring the rear axle down a little bit, slow it down. This will speed the front axle up. What that will do is create a torque split that's more biased towards the front. So in a vertical climb, the front wheels are spinning faster than the rear. It's less likely to wheelie and flip over backwards. So a real common change to switch over this. It will make your Sportsman crawler infinitely more competitive with the other Sportsman rigs. The other things I'm doing is, because my AX10 was an early kit version, they had the crappy aluminum lockers, which any of you guys who mess with those know how terrible they are. So what I've bought are the Axial Hd Lockers. One of the RPP stainless, those were out of stock at my time of purchase, but there are a lot of guys in our club running the HD lockers, and they hold up just great. So I'm putting those in my conversion, and then so I don't have to go through all the crap of taking the transmission apart and getting this dig off. This is actually a DNA dig, which they don't make anymore, but still a really great piece. I'm going to be building up a new axial transmission. These are like 30 bucks. I figure for 30 bucks it's going to save me from having to tear that apart. And then when you have a dig, it actually moves the output of your transmission back, so you have to run a shorter rear drive shaft than a front. So I picked up another set of MIP drive shafts. I'm going to build those up and put those on there as well. That'll eliminate a ton of sprung weight in my rig and get that huge servo off the top and get that weight down where it needs to be and get that rig more competitive. So anyway, that pretty much concludes volume 1 of my video. I just wanted to try to get this framed up. I just wanted to kind of show you guys some changes you can make for guys who are just getting started and kind of avoid some of the pitfalls that I fell into, as well as show you kind of where you can go if you decide to kind of get more into it and step up to the next tier of vehicles. But anyway, the rest of this video series is going to focus on putting this pile of parts together on my AX10 here to get it set up for next crawling season, which is coming up here pretty soon. So we're going to get this thing torn apart and get ready.